Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here with yet another Reviewer's Log Supplemental video, which I do from time to time to take a second look at something I've reviewed, to talk about things that I neglected to talk about in my review. So, as I usually do, I've been watching other YouTubers' videos about Strange New Worlds since my last Reviewer's Log Supplemental. And I do that, by the way, because I like to get other people's takes on stuff that I've seen. It helps keep me well-rounded in my understanding of things that I'm watching. It helps me see things from perspectives that I might not have seen them from. And it helps me to catch things, well, not catch things, to learn about things that I didn't catch when I watched whatever it is I'm reviewing. And I say whatever it is I'm reviewing because so far I've done these videos about episodes of Strange New Worlds, but if the need arises, I may end up doing them about other things that I watch. So far I haven't really had a reason to do that, but it could happen. Anyway, what ends up happening is I see these other YouTubers' videos and I go, oh, I didn't think about that, or oh, I missed that. And when that happens, I feel like I should bring those things up to put my own thoughts out there in regards to them, because I don't always see them the same way that other people see them when they see them. So there are some things I want to address about two of the last three episodes of Strange New Worlds that have come up in a couple of these other YouTubers' videos, starting with Nitpicking Nerd, who is, if I'm not mistaken, also Major Grin on YouTube. He asks a few good questions about different things that I had forgotten about, which tie into, for starters, the episode Spock Amok of Strange New Worlds. First among those is the issue of Nurse Chapel and why it is that she doesn't know in the original series. I mean, we know why she doesn't know, but in the original series, she doesn't know that Spock was engaged before. And we know that she didn't know that because she specifically asks him this question in an original series episode when clearly she knows. I mean, now, right? And according to Strange New Worlds, knew before then. So why doesn't she know in TOS? We know why, because this is a prequel and they wibbly wobbly timey wimey. But the real question is, why didn't the producers know that she didn't know in the original series and like not include her in the series if they were going to do this thing with tpring, or versa versa there? Did they not know? Did they know but didn't care? Neither of those is a good look, but that's what you have to ask. Also in TOS, in the original series, Uhura doesn't know who tpring is when she first shows up in Amok Time. But she's been on Enterprise this whole time where tpring has been showing up. So how do they explain that? Now, it's possible that this is explainable by the fact that they've yet to actually show them crossing paths on Strange New Worlds, if I'm not mistaken. Although she's at the meeting where tpring is behaving as Spock, and so, like, anyway, so why doesn't she know? You know, it's, you'd have to believe that all of this stuff was going on with her being on the ship a couple of different times, yet Uhura never heard of her, didn't know who she was. You know, when Chapel knows, and Ortegas knows, and I think number one knows, it's like, okay, come on, how does Uhura not know? It's a head scratcher. It's like, why do they do these things? Also in Spock Amok, on the list of Enterprise bingo squares or checkboxes or whatever, it lists sneak a tribble into the Enterprise or something like that. And as was noted before when they did the tribble episode of Short Treks, tribbles aren't supposed to be known to the Federation or Starfleet at this point in time because, once again, Uhura doesn't recognize them and has never heard of them in the Trouble with Tribbles. Yet they appear on a list that comes from a game that the lower decks officers are playing on the Enterprise And that would include Uhura, because she's there as a cadet. How does she not know what a tribble is? You know, later. And nobody else seems to know either. Chekhov, Scotty, Spock doesn't say anything about having encountered them before, because obviously they hadn't been encountered before on the original series. So does he not know what a tribble is on Strange New Worlds? I find that hard to believe if everybody else knows. So I don't know, it's just one of those things. But even if you want to say, nope, Uhura's the only one who asks what they are, so she's the only one who doesn't know in the original series. There is kind of, sort of, might be, could possibly an explanation of this. Because there was a time when she had her memory completely erased in the original series and had to relearn everything. So maybe a couple of things from earlier in her life didn't quite come back to her. But that would only account for her not remembering tribbles specifically, because the episode Amok Time, in which she isn't aware of who tpring is, takes place before the memory wipe, but after the events of Spock Amok. So again, maybe it's that they never crossed paths and it never came up otherwise in conversation. Of course, they also don't specifically show anyone doing anything with a tribble during any scenes of, people playing Enterprise Bingo, so you could chalk it up to something that's listed on a prop that the audience wasn't meant to see and that therefore isn't actually canon. The fact that people knew about tribbles. So I don't know, this one's a little iffy. Anyway, getting back to Nurse Chapel, at some point she has a very serious romance with Dr. Roger Corby, and by the end of the original series has made it a point to try to locate him after he disappears. And she facilitates this search by making a choice to switch career paths and become part of the Enterprise crew. The issue is how it's mentioned in the original series. Kirk says something like, I understand you gave up a career in XYZ field in order to sign on to a starship so that you would have a better chance of finding him. So maybe she leaves the Enterprise at some point to start pursuing this other career, meets the good doctor, but then when he disappears, she somehow works her way back onto the Enterprise. Of course, this doesn't explain why she doesn't seem to know that Spock has long been engaged. So these are yet more things that they messed up, or more accurately, created confusion around by introducing scenarios and facts that don't immediately make sense without some kind of explanation, that at this point would need to be forthcoming, because that's what happens when you do a prequel, which I knew was going to happen when they were just first talking about even doing this show. The crazy thing is that, as we've seen before, they can't even pay attention to their own continuity, their own, CBS All Access Paramount Plus continuity. As an example, once again, the nitpicking nerd pointed out that the front of the saucer section of the Enterprise was completely blown off during Discovery Season 2. So how is the Scorch, an original piece of the hull that's never been replaced, that was part of Enterprise Bingo, situated in that very spot, right at the front of the saucer section? Because the whole front of the saucer section had to be replaced at the very least. So they just don't pay attention to their own stuff. I mean, me personally, I can let that particular point go because Discovery is so bad that if there are things about Season 2 that relate to the Enterprise and its officers that don't comport with what's going on in this show, I'm just going to ignore them, because I had forgotten, but even if I notice them, I'm just going to ignore them, because that show is horrible. And any aspects of pre-TOS canon that it established don't deserve any attention. In the past, I let those things bother me, like how the uniforms that the Enterprise crew was wearing on Discovery make no sense within the larger uniform progression from series to series, between Discovery, Strange New Worlds, and the original series. But I'm going to let this one go at this point because it comes from a poisoned tree. So I'm just going to forget that they blew off the front of the saucer section of the Enterprise in Season 2 of Discovery. I say this because Strange New Worlds is a decent show that stands on its own, and I'm inclined to defer to it over Discovery when it comes to these things. That said, the show does keep doing things that contradict not only its own continuity, which, whether I ignore it or not, is still sloppy, but also things that contradict the original series, like the things about Nurse Chapel and Uhura and I don't think it can be denied at this point, really and truly, that this show is in fact a reboot of the Star Trek universe. The same way that the Battlestar Galactica reboot was a reboot of the original Battlestar Galactica. They're never going to officially say that, but I mean, it's pretty clear that they've told the writers to treat it like it is a reboot, and that as long as it adheres to what was established in the original series to a certain degree, they shouldn't concern themselves with clearing every little line of dialogue with something that might have been touched upon in the original series. And I guess in a reboot, you wouldn't even care about adhering to the original at all, but it has to be that that's the case, that it's a reboot, because the only other option is that they didn't tell the writers that, and all of these things are just getting by them, which would make them sloppy, as I said, and I don't think that that's as likely as the other scenario is to be the case. I think they've just said, we don't care. And, you know, if you had asked me years ago, should they do a reboot of Star Trek, I probably would have said no, even though I very much enjoyed the reboot of Battlestar Galactica. And the reason for that is that I don't remember the original Battlestar Galactica at all. I know I watched it. I know Lorne Greene was in it. You know, I know there was a Starbuck and an Apollo, and I know Richard Hatch and Dirk Benedict played them, but that's about it. I remember original Star Trek quite a bit, though I have also forgotten a lot about original Star Trek at the same time. Anyway, remembering it to the extent that I do, I wouldn't have wanted it to be remade. But now that they have essentially rebooted it with this show, and it's pretty good, I'm fine with it being a reboot, because then it stands on its own, and it doesn't matter if they get these little things wrong. I mean, you know, it doesn't matter anyway in the big picture, right? Life and death and all that. But where I would have been opposed to a rebooted TOS era show that takes place on Enterprise in the past, and by in the past, I mean right up until the show debuted. Now that the show is here and it's good, I'm perfectly happy to watch it as a reboot, because the canon isn't so important that it should be adhered to even in a reboot scenario. In fact, my problems with Star Trek 2009 were more that I thought they gave us bad versions of the characters, or at least the Kirk character, more than anything else. Once they established that it was a different universe and it was essentially a reboot, I was fine with it, apart from narrative things that just were awful. But as long as they refuse to admit that this is a reboot, these things that they do that contradict the original series are going to continue to make me feel that it must be the case that they just don't give a shit about the older fans. That's the only other option. Because it can only be one of those two things. It's either a reboot or they don't give a shit about the older fans. I mean, it could be a combination of both. And it's just infuriating that they won't admit which it is, or that it is indeed a combination of both things. I think they're better off admitting that it's a reboot, either by a blanket intention or by the fact of what's actually contained within what they've produced as a result of individual plot point choices and how it all lines up with what came before, than they would be admitting that they don't give a shit about the older fans. But the fact that they won't admit that, or that it's a reboot or whatever, is just maddening. It's actually a form of gaslighting is what it is. And it drives me insane. But let's move on to the Serene Squall. I didn't really have any additional notes about the episode in between Spock Amok and Serene Squall. So we're going to move to the episode Serene Squall. At least two of the three other YouTubers whose Strange New Worlds reviews I watch, if not all three of them, have pointed out some things about this episode as well as Spock Amok. And they have to do with a couple different things. One of them is the character of Captain Angel. I barely managed to catch wind of the fact that the person playing Captain Angel is a trans female. So they were designated male at birth, transitioned to female, according to what I have read. So I knew that going in. Just before the episode aired, I came across this information. But I guess the actor identifies as non-binary, and if not the actor, the character of Captain Angel is a non-binary individual. Now, I did not notice that, In the episode, I don't believe it came out in the dialogue. All the same, if you go back and watch my review of the episode, you'll notice that except for a couple times where I slipped, I tried to refer to the character as them because I wasn't sure. Just based on the fact that the actor has transitioned, I thought I would play it safe and not gender them, although I ended up gendering them by accident at a couple times in the video. But I did not see or hear anything in the episode itself that indicated that the character was non-binary. However, that would appear to be the case. I looked up a synopsis of the episode on StarTrek.com, the official Star Trek website, and it states right in the episode synopsis that Captain Angel is in fact a non-binary character. So, okay, I don't have a problem with that. But a couple of other YouTubers do in a sort of indirect way because of something the character says to Spock. There's a scene in his quarters where he's working on something and the captain comes in, still pretending to be the doctor character, and talks to him about the duality of his nature. Now, in my review, I thought the conversation was misplaced. I thought it didn't need to be brought up, that it came up inorganically, but sometimes people bring up things inorganically. They kind of wedge them in there in conversation. So for that to happen on a show, it's not, you don't have to see it as, oh, they're putting this in for some type of agenda. But some people think that that's what was happening because what the character says to him ultimately is, you're torn between your Vulcan and human half. You don't have to be torn. You don't have to be one or the other. Basically telling him be both or find a way to blend them. Now that line did not stand out to me because I think it was pertinent advice for the character. And I think it's something that Spock ultimately does in fact do. He embraces his human half and incorporates it into his being, where before he had sort of rejected it or tamped it down and had favored his Vulcan half heavily. So ultimately he comes to that realization. If you take this episode and this series out of it and look at the character's history, that's something that he comes to decide on his own eventually, which I believe I noted in my review of the episode. So, and he says as much. So, if not so much in so many words, in other words. So, the idea that someone planted that seed in his mind at an earlier time makes sense and fits the character and fits the lore of the character. So, to me, it was like a callback or a bit of foreshadowing or what have you. But other people have taken it as a sort of line that was put in there to fulfill an agenda of commenting on the issue of gender identity, being gender fluid, being non-binary, being trans, and have taken umbrage at it. So looking at it now that the issue has been raised of why that line was there, I can look and say, okay, yeah, they probably did mean to have that line be taken as a commentary on gender issues. In fact, what it says on StarTrek.com in the episode synopsis is the following: given that this profound wisdom is postulated by a non-binary character, it carries even more weight and presents an open-minded way of perceiving the universe. So I think that makes it pretty clear that they were trying to effect some type of commentary or other on the issue of choosing identity. I don't know, I don't think it really works in that way, but it could have been their attempt to do that. But I don't understand why anyone would have a problem with it. First of all, Star Trek has always commented on social issues. It has always had an opinion, and it has always expressed that opinion. So when it does this in Strange New Worlds, why do you find it objectionable? That's what Star Trek is. There are other shows that are going to do this from time to time, insert agenda-driven dialogue or plot points. Superman and Lois might do it. I don't know. The Flash might do it. I can see where you might take issue to it there because those are just superhero shows. They're not supposed to really be social commentary shows, but Star Trek always has been. So what if you're a Star Trek fan, how does that bother you? Did they just think it was ham-fistedly done? I don't know, but that's what's supposed to be in Star Trek. That's the whole point of Star Trek. So I don't understand the objection. Anyway, there are other issues that came up in this episode. One of them is the whole issue of the distance between where the Enterprise was and where the Federation was, and getting communication back and forth from the Enterprise to the Federation, which Spock clearly says in the early part of the episode would take 2 days just one way. So a couple of YouTubers have raised the question of, well, how were they able to communicate with tpring so quickly? How were they able to have a live conversation with her while the Enterprise was still in that part of space and she was at the Vulcan rehabilitation facility? And I don't see where this is actually a contradiction, because we know from the description of tpring's location that shows up on the screen at the beginning of the episode that she's not on Vulcan, which of course is in the Federation. She's on the moon of some previously unknown planet. I don't remember it ever being mentioned before, at a Vulcan facility, but it's not Vulcan. It's not on Vulcan. So it could be also outside the Federation, and it could well be closer to where the Enterprise was than Vulcan is, such that communications were able to be conducted normally. So I think the folks who have talked about how this is a discrepancy have made a mistake. I think they missed the thing where it says in the beginning of the episode on the bottom of the screen where she's located. She's not on Vulcan. So hopefully that clears that up. The other issue, the only other issue is Sybok. The end of the episode, they introduce Sybok, and Spock tells Nurse Chapel, I have this half-brother, Sybok. So that by itself isn't a problem, because we don't see Nurse Chapel in Star Trek V that I recall. And so there's never a moment where the character doesn't know who Sybok is when he shows up in Star Trek V. But what we have to be concerned about is what's going to happen in the next couple of episodes, or maybe next season, the next time we hear about Sybok, because obviously they didn't drop this bomb to not bring him in, further. So once again, we have to wonder, is Sybok gonna cross paths with Uhura? And are we gonna have to ask ourselves, okay, why doesn't Uhura know who it is in Star Trek V? And do we know that she doesn't know who it is? No, not really. But obviously she doesn't mention him, because at the time when they made that movie, she had no past with him. But we don't know what's going to happen in these next few episodes. So are they going to interact? Are they going to keep them separate enough that the fact that she doesn't mention him at all in Star Trek V, in a line where she might say, oh, the last time I ran into this guy, XYZ, because you would think that would occur. But it remains to be seen. But here's the problem that I don't think they can really fix. In Star Trek V, when Sybok wants Spock to join him on his crusade to get to Shakari, after he shows him something of his past that he didn't know about, which had prompted McCoy to go with him, he says, okay, you showed me something about my past, but I can't go with you. I am not the same child or the scared boy that you left behind so many years ago. Since that time, I have found myself. I know who I am. He says, Sybok, you are my brother, but you do not know me. And so the implication is that they haven't had any interaction. And Sybok would have no way of knowing anything about who Spock had become. So they literally can't interact on Strange New Worlds in any way that would make Spock saying that in Star Trek V be inaccurate. In other words, if they do interact in any significant way, Sybok could have come back to him when he said that in Star Trek V and said, what are you talking about? I saw you 15 years ago when you were much older than just a boy, and I saw that you'd become a Starfleet officer, and I know that you were different than when I left you behind on Vulcan. So how are they going to do this? And it goes back to the whole thing of how are they possibly going to continue to say that this isn't a reboot? They can say that it's not their intention all they want, that it wasn't their intention to reboot Star Trek with this show, that they didn't go into it rebooting Star Trek by intention, but they've rebooted Star Trek in practice. So it's just so frustrating. It really is. Because like I said, I'm enjoying this show. I don't see very many narrative problems self-contained within it that make it bad. It's good. It's enjoyable. I like it. The only things that keep coming up is I go, yep, that doesn't comport with what came before, over and over again. And whether they said it's a reboot or not, I probably would still have those moments, but at least then I could go, all right, yeah, this is a reboot though. But because they won't admit that it is, they look like asses. And they make me feel like they think I'm an ass and that I don't know my Star Trek history enough to know that they're changing things, or that I'm just insignificant as a fan. And you know what? That would be fine if it's not a nice sentiment, right, to have directed at you, but it would be fine if I weren't paying $7 a month to watch this show and the other shows that crap on continuity. So it just galls me. It really does. A couple of different people pointed out that this episode was kind of a ripoff of Star Trek Beyond, where the Enterprise was lured into a trap. I don't really see it. You know, they had a problem with the fact that the Enterprise gets stuck in that laser web at the beginning for a couple of minutes, and that moment was part of the trailer, and that we were kind of led to believe, oh, they're going to be involved with the Tholians, but then, of course, that wasn't the case. And not only was that not the case, but the laser thing was like a 2-second, no big deal. And they kind of feel like the promo was disingenuous, the trailer. And I can't disagree with that. But it didn't occur to me at the time. But anyway, that's really it. I just wanted to talk about these things in a separate video so that I don't have to talk about it ahead of or after my next review within the review video that's coming for the next episode, which, by the way, looks very interesting. It looks like the Enterprise is going to find itself in a situation where the crew thinks they are other people from sort of Shakespearean times on Earth. And yeah, that's going to be a ride. So I'm looking forward to it. I will, of course, be back with a review of episode 8 and other content, of course, including possibly other editions of Reviewer's Log Supplemental. For now, I'm going to take off. I wish you peace and long life.